Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining and spending your evening with us. We're here for our last part of the Crisis to Catalyst Sustainability Transformation webinar series. I'm Upma Arora from Level 3. I'm the general manager there. And if just for some of you who don't know what Level 3 is, we are an ecosystem and we connect startups, corporates, and ecosystem partners together to drive innovation. This part is very exciting and it's very close to home because we're all about collaborations. And Sarah is from Deloitte, who's one of our corporate partners. And we're today joined by Alistair, who's one of our startup based at Level 3. So we've got family here. So I won't say much, but today's session is all about collaborations, how startups connect with corporates, how partnerships lead to real impact. So I'll let Sarah and Alistair tell you all about that. But before that, just a few housekeeping stuff. This platform works best on Chrome. Don't ask us why. If you do have some problems, please just put it in chat and we will take it to a private chat and help you support it. Keep the questions coming. You can ask questions in Q&A section or you can ask it at chat. You can upvote your questions. There will be polls during the session, so please keep lookout for them. And if you go into the poll section, you should be able to see the results. And if not, we will share the results over the chat. Keep it interactive, enjoy the session, keep giving us the feedback, and thank you so much for joining today. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Upma. It's really great to be back on, and obviously today is the third and final part of the webinar series. So just to give a bit of an agenda of today, so I'll be speaking for about 15-20 minutes. We'll have a poll and then we'll come to the Q&A with Alistair as well. I'm going to turn my video off now just to make sure we optimize the sound and everything, but I'll be back on when we get to the Q&A. So what I would like to kind of just quickly run through is that this is obviously a three-part webinar series, and it is building on a Deloitte research paper titled The Sustainability Transformation. And the paper, which will be out actually next month, that explores three key strategies for businesses pursuing the sustainability transformation. So first is to look ahead, the second looking inside, and third look around. So each week we have explored each of these different components, and we've invited different speakers on each week. So I'll give a quick overview to each of the sections and just kind of give a quick name drop for each of the speakers that has joined us each week. You will be able to listen back to each of the webinars and also download the slides. We've been circulating these after each webinar. So we've teamed up with Level 3 to provide these perspectives and this three-part series, and also connecting with investors, corporates and startups to explore how they are each responding to the COVID-19 crisis, and also looking at whether the crisis can actually act as a catalyst for a sustainability transformation. So in week one, we focused on the need to look ahead to your future business, to understand what threats and more importantly, the opportunities that sustainability pressures are posing to a company's future business. And in week one, we were joined by Mason Tan, an impact investor from Garden Impact. Week two, we focused on the need for businesses to look inside. So really to identify areas for innovation to accelerate the sustainability transformation. And the purpose of really looking inside is to consider how businesses can be reconfigured and considered how business models and business strategies can be repositioned to really capture those future business opportunities. So last week we were joined by Petra Mikas, Global Head of Sustainable Supply Chain at Unilever, and we had a good chat specifically about COVID and how that was causing a huge disruption to global supply chains, but also learning about the importance of business innovation to adapt really rapidly to those sorts of disruptions whilst maintaining and upholding sustainability standards. And this week, we will explore how businesses can look around and how they can leverage their business ecosystem. So this is really about exploring how to leverage to capture people's capabilities and influence others around the business. This is all about collaboration and co-creation to really create a bit of competitive advantage, but also really, again, to kind of harness those business opportunities that you can see but can't necessarily capture independently at the pace that you want. So this week, I'm really pleased to say that we're joined by Alistair Douglas, founder and partner of Eachmile Technologies. So we are having a kind of feeding through this idea of startups and how startups can collaborate with one another. So Alistair will join us, as noted, in about 15 to 20 minutes. So as we go through the webinar, please feel free to enter in your questions into the chat function, and we'll pick them up towards the back end of the session. So I wanted to kind of this is a slide that I actually brought up in the very first webinar, and I wanted to bring it back up because I think it is really incredibly important to really just acknowledge and recognize that what we are going through now is a unprecedented and profound global crisis. COVID-19 has really eclipsed all other kind of epidemics, both in size and scope, but it has also eclipsed a bigger conversation that we were having on climate change and more broadly on sustainability just before it was top of the agenda, just before this hit. And I think this is really interesting because for a time in the first few weeks of COVID really ramping up, I think there was a real fear and a growing conversation among sustainability professionals that the pandemic was kind of throwing the momentum of sustainability and more specifically climate change off course. What I would say to that is, the more that I kind of stop and reflect, the more I feel that this momentum is really starting to build back up. Crises such as COVID-19 can be profound catalysts for change, and they do create new opportunities for businesses to gain a bit of perspective. And one thing that's been really interesting, just kind of observing, but also speaking to a number of different businesses, both in this region and further afield, is that as they're starting to look to recover, they are talking more and more about building resilient businesses and having business models and business strategies that can sustain existential crises and stresses such as climate change. And the current crisis has also really forced businesses to lift their head up, to look ahead to the next horizon, to see, what crises may be fast approaching. It's forced them to look back inside. Many today are questioning their business models, their business strategies, and questioning what else they can do differently to ensure that their business not only survives this current period of instability, but really thrives in the future. And they are also starting to look around to their business ecosystem to see who they can collaborate with and how they can gain competitive advantage. And this is really where today's webinar lies. It's this idea of look around. So this is, we've kind of termed it a strategy. It's a strategy for businesses to reinforce their resilience moving forward. And the strategy itself is built on a realization that it's not always necessary for a business to go alone, to build or to buy capabilities to influence or transform in-house. So what we're really looking at here is this recognition that businesses can move from kind of build up and buy in. So build up, we're terming kind of ground up efforts. This is kind of pulling together an in-house team to kind of create a new technology or new solution, for instance. And by buy in, we're referring to acquisitions. So purchasing outside talent or companies or capabilities to bring in-house. Now, these two luxuries or these two items can be considered as luxuries in the current situation, as there's not necessarily the time to build up or resources to buy in. So this presents a new challenge for many businesses and also highlights the benefits of looking around. And we see looking around two main kind of strategies here that businesses can take. It can be leveraging capabilities or it can be leveraging influence. So by leveraging businesses for the capabilities of others, it's really looking at how companies can connect with specialist providers within their business ecosystem to leverage the knowledge, the skills, the technology to really increase the pace or scale of the transformation needed. And second, which is looking at leveraging others' influence, this is about creating a favourable environment for a business to transform. It's about really kind of joining in the momentum of others. So by connecting with like-minded partners in an ecosystem, businesses can amplify their influence and really create that favourable environment for them to influence others, influence a policy environment, or influence other key actors in the environment around them. And there's a couple of case examples just to highlight this really in a sustainability context. So the first I wanted to highlight is Nestlé and the work that they've been doing to create the Institute of Packaging Sciences. Now this is a really clear example of an organisation that is leveraging others' capabilities. So Nestle, obviously a consumer goods company, like many other kind of big consumer goods companies, they have committed really ambitious targets on their packaging. So by 2025, Nestle has committed to have 100% recyclable or reusable packaging. Now, this is a tough goal for Nestle, and one that they recognised they couldn't do alone. And so in 2009, they set up the institutes to co-develop and test new packaging materials and systems with their suppliers, research organisations, and startups. And this is really interesting. So they partnered it's actually a group of educational institutions and an associated accelerator program and startup space to really pull together the local knowledge around them to come to a very clear solution around packaging. So this is just a really interesting dynamic that was brought together. And through this process, Nestle is actively testing and trialling potential solutions today and piloting them in their supply chain. Now, looking at the influence side of things, so leveraging influence, this is a really interesting example, again, from consumer goods. So this is the Sustainable Food Policy Alliance, and this was set up in the US in 2018 by 4 key companies, Mars, Danone, Nestle, and Unilever. And they joined together, so these are kind of, competitors in many regards, but like-minded in many of their strategies that they're approaching today. So they set up this SFPA with the ambition to shape food-related regulation in a number of key areas that were important to their business. So from the environment to nutrition, consumer transparency, people, communities, and food safety. And by coming together and joining in this alliance, what they were able to do is encourage the enhancement of food standards in the US. And this is about creating that favourable business environment, because what they were able to do here is encourage the development of a regulatory environment that would support their future business. All of these companies are moving in a very similar direction. They all see sustainability as central to their future success. They're all shifting towards healthier products and services. And so creating a regulatory environment that saw that as a baseline standard is going to put them and their future business in a good position moving forward. So the approach really, the additional benefit of both of these 2 approaches, so leveraging others' capabilities and also leveraging others' influence, is that they enable companies to distribute and thereby reduce their market risk. So they can kind of shift some of the responsibility, but kind of shift some of the hard work between multiple parties, where they're all able to mutually benefit. And again, particularly thinking about the current situation where, we have a likely sustained economic kind of uncertainty ahead of us, businesses do not have a huge amount of resources and capital to necessarily invest in building these solutions ground up or buying them in. So looking to others within your ecosystem, collaborating, co-creating to achieve a similar end, this makes a huge amount of sense when there is such uncertainty and economic constraint. And I wanted to also just highlight some of the really amazing collaborations we've started to see emerge from the COVID-19 crisis, because it's been a phenomenal amount of collaborations and unprecedented collaborations coming out. I'm just going to very quickly draw on some of these, but we've seen Sanofi and GSK, so these are two of the world's largest pharma companies, come together, combining their science and technologies in a global effort to develop a 2019 vaccine, COVID-19 vaccine. We've seen Apple and Google also join forces with their technology to create a contact tracing app. We've seen Microsoft, Google, and startup Plantier and the NHS come together to build a platform to gather different data points from disparate sources to create a dashboard for the UK's National Health Service. And this has actually been amazing, because this has been used to help the NHS deploy staff and target resources where it's most needed to respond to the crisis. And then also looking at the impact investing space. So this is obviously a topic that we discussed in the first week. We saw last week the Global Impact Investing Network combine with 16 other impact investing and corporate foundations to develop and launch the Response, Recovery and Resilience Investment Coalition. To really coordinate investments worldwide into COVID response. And so these collaborations, I just want to really re-emphasize, they are unprecedented, both at the speed of what they're doing, but also the scale and ambition of what they're trying to do. And independently, these companies could not have provided these solutions at the scale and pace, but together they have. And so I'm just really intrigued to see how this is really starting to shape this idea of business ecosystems and perhaps breaking down some initial resistance or barriers. And I wanted to put this kind of thought to you. So reflecting on this a little bit more in terms of how the current situation is shaping up. So this is just my personal sort of perspective here. But we're starting to see really that the current crisis is starting to raise, interesting questions about the role of business in tackling social and potentially environmental issues. So obviously the current crisis is a social issue first and foremost, but we do know, looking ahead to the climate crisis, there are many social issues and environmental issues that are around us. And taking the current situation, we're seeing that governments are unable to handle the crisis alone. And we are seeing companies really stepping up to respond. We've seen the surge of all these different collaborations and partnerships as many want to support the development of a global solution. This in turn is leading to the development of kind of what we're calling pop-up ecosystems. So this is where companies partner to respond to a critical need and drive much needed innovation. So again, innovation is a core part of what the private sector and especially the startup community is able to offer at a point of crisis. And I believe that over the longer term, we're starting to see companies and startups and governments actually kind of grow in confidence that collaborations can work, and also grow in confidence that businesses can meaningfully start to provide a solution to some of these big challenges, whether it's COVID or whether it's climate change or whether it's some other sustainability issues. So I just think that these the current situation is really starting to change a bit of discourse and dialogue around business collaboration and also businesses' efforts to really tackle sustainability. So to wrap up this sort of end, what I would say is I just wanted to kind of highlight a bit of a concluding thought to the presentation and also to the paper, is that really that crises can be profound catalysts for change. They can create opportunities to gain new perspectives, and businesses that see sustainability challenges not only as a threat, but really as an opportunity, whether to create new business opportunities, will really be best placed to unlock new innovations and ignite unexpected collaborations. So that's just kind of my thought there. So what we'll do now, we'll run into a poll just to kind of get your opinion on some of these things. And then we will bring Alistair on. So I want to know your outlook. The question is, how critical are business ecosystems today? And we've got three kind of options or perspectives that actually I think all three are valid. But just to get your view, so do you think business ecosystems are really, they're just not critical today? Businesses need to get their head down, they need to focus on survival right now? Do you see them as kind of somewhat critical with the second option should be somewhat critical, with businesses benefiting in a targeted way. And then the final option is very critical. So businesses need to collaborate to explore new markets and develop new solutions. I tell you what, let's bring Alistair on, and then when the poll's ready, we'll bring it up. Okay, so Alistair, I'll turn my video back on. It's really great for you to join us today. So thanks for coming on. So Alistair is a founder and partner of Eachmile Technologies, based here in Singapore. So Alistair, perhaps maybe we can get started first of all with just kind of learning a little bit more about Eachmile Technologies and your business ecosystem. So for instance, how do you work with your partners to leverage their capabilities or their influence? It'd be great to just kind of learn a little bit more about what you do and who you interact with.
All right, yeah, thanks very much for having me on the webinar, Sarah and Ulma. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a very important topic. So Eachmile Technologies, we're a startup that builds and applies technologies to supply chains. We want to help them connect and move from being fragmented to being more cooperative, to being coordinated and more collaborative. And we really focus on that critical first mile and hoping to create a framework around traceability technology to incentivize data gathering and sharing. And data down to the first mile that can really help identify, verify, and reward legal and responsible producers. It can also help to improve the productivity and sustainability of the supply chain. They can help de-risk and assess risks for the finance and insurance industries, and the data that can also lead to better and informed policy generation, both at a company level, but also at a government level. An example of who we work with and what we do more specifically would be our Smart Farm initiative with DSM. DSM is a multinational corporation in the animal, human nutrition and health industry. And we're working with them and other in feed ingredient suppliers and organizations like the US Soybean Export Council, feed mills, farmers, technology companies and startups to collect data from farms using sensors, and then relate this back to the research and development trials that we conduct together with them. And the objective of that is to really set this sort of ecosystem approach to get the data that we need to achieve precision farming, improve feed formulations, and achieve precision nutrition. And all of that can help us achieve the sustainable development goals. And DSM is a great an example, really, of the change that companies make over time. DSM stands for Dutch State Mines, and they used to basically mine coal, and now they're in the animal, human, and nutrition and health space. So, and they're leaders in sustainability and the SDGs. So, there's an example for you.
That is amazing. And actually, it was really good to just kind of hear about all the different components of, who you're collaborating with. So it sounds like kind of the ecosystem and how you interact with the ecosystem is pretty essential to Eachmile Technologies and the business model.
Yeah, it's critical.
Yeah.
The more companies now that sort of operate in a silo or deliberately try to take advantage of and exploit sort of information asymmetries, the more isolated they can find themselves. So I think it's critical that they move away from these sorts of silos and purely transactional models and this sort of short-term win-at-all-cost approach to working more closely with companies in their supply chain, in their broader ecosystem and startups, and share data where they get greater insights into the supply chain, and that gives them critical advantages. So yeah, for me, I definitely on the poll, I went straight to critical.
And that actually, I was going to ask you what your response was there, because I'm really intrigued about this, about kind of whether with the current, I mean, in the sustainability space specifically, but also kind of with the current, instability and uncertainty that we're facing, in terms of like whether you see business ecosystems becoming kind of more or less important at this point in time. Like, are they a distraction or are they essential?
I think they're essential. Like I said, I think that COVID-19 has really been a disruption to many companies, but it's also highlighted a lot of opportunities. And we're seeing companies like Twitter and Google look at the way they work and sort of saying, okay, staff, you don't need to come back. So, it's, I think, like I said, if those companies that are better connected to their suppliers, if they've got an open channel of communication, they're much more likely to be better informed of the situation. They're going to be more agile and more adaptable. And so they're the ones that will be able to see, have a closer look at their supply chain, what their strengths and weaknesses are together. They'll be able to maneuver better in a shifting landscape and the evolving regulation that's occurring. And so together with their ecosystem partners, they'll be able to better succeed to handle the disruptions of COVID-19.
Yeah, actually, it's important. It's good that you mentioned that. This came up last week as well. So we had Petra from Unilever on last week, and she was talking about the criticality of data with all the disruption that's taking place right now. And it's something that I've kind of seen come to the fore. Obviously, in the sustainability space, and of course with the work that you're doing, kind of data and technology is kind of clearly critical. And it's providing a real kind of value add for organizations to improve their transparency and the traceability of what they're doing. Do you think the current disruption is really forcing the acceleration of new technologies and solutions that are data driven and tech driven, that support collaboration between the different business ecosystems? Do you see these data driven solutions as really kind of coming to the fore now, as like they are critical?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the pace of change has been staggering pre-COVID-19. I think it's only going to accelerate with COVID-19. We're sort of the future of industry, and Industry 4.0 is very much data driven. We're sort of moving from Industry 3.0, where it's computers and automation. It's now going to be integrated with this sort of smart autonomous systems with data from IoT sensors, feeding machine learning algorithms. Hopefully those sensors will be providing critical data on the health of our environment as well at the same time, so we can integrate this data into sort of any of the predictive or prescriptive outputs from those algorithms. Actually, this morning I was thinking about how company data scientists could tag all data coming into a company to a relevant SDG, so that or a suite of SDGs, or even being some sort of climate smart weighting to it, so there's able to monitor its performance in real time to the UN SDGs and plot a course that sort of best balances the profit with people and planet. And in certain situations, actually choose planet over profit. And if governments could have access to that, there might be incentives or tax relief or something where they've made a decision to choose planet over profit as such.
Yeah, actually,
Does that make sense?
yeah, it does, and I think that's really interesting. So it's something that I've also started thinking about more recently, in a sense of how do you start to kind of nudge or incentivize behavior. So rather than just kind of hard regulation that sets a standard, because too often I believe regulation obviously is critical, but sometimes it's just seen as the standard and you don't need to go beyond it. And so if there are kind of like using data, for instance, if there are ways to kind of nudge and incentivize organizations to go above and beyond, collect more, collaborate more, share more, give greater insights, because I think for tricky problems, whether it's about traceability in the seafood industry, for instance, it's one actor will not have all the information and to be able to provide a complete solution to it. So if you get organizations working together a little bit more, sharing more than what is required or doing more than what is required by law, it's a way for organizations to get a picture of the situation and therefore develop stronger and more robust solutions to problems.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned the seafood industry. It's obviously an area that I know quite well. It's my PhD was in the seafood supply chains in the tuna industry, actually. And supply chains in the seafood industry are very fragmented just by the nature of fishing. But we need a lot more data to verify whether a supply chain or a product is legal, reported, and regulated. The UN FAO basically believe that more than 30% of our seafood is considered illegal, unreported, unregulated. And of course, there are systems out there, eco-labels like the Marine Stewardship Council, that certify fisheries as being sustainable. But in some respects, when they first started, they overlooked the social side of it. So you could have sustainable seafood that could be processed by children in factories. And so you need a lot of data to show that the fishery is sustainable, that the bycatch, the stuff that you're catching at the same time, is also sustainable, that you're not impacting the habitat and those sorts of things. So there's a lot of data required. It's very much information intensive industry. And so how companies can collaborate better on data sharing to reduce the burden of auditing as well, and use technology to do that. Obviously, blockchain technology is very exciting for me. We're behind an initiative called Fishcoin, which allows downstream actors in a supply chain to reward the upstream actors with a token that puts the data on a blockchain, which they can redeem for value, such as a mobile top-up. So we can reach those fishers and farmers in the developing nations that produce 90% of our seafood. And there's other exciting things with blockchain too. It just sort of builds up the trust amongst the actors within a supply chain. But we can also ascribe ownership using blockchain. When we monetize that data, we can share that data instantly. So certainly technology can transform the seafood supply chain and the industry itself.
And can you, just for if anyone is dialing in that's not familiar with blockchain, can you give like just a short kind of definition explaining it, if that's possible? if anything like that exists, I know it gets.
No. It's a good question. Obviously, a lot of people know it as the underlying technology for Bitcoin, but really, it's just a distributed ledger.
Yeah.
So essentially, you're putting information on hundreds of thousands of computers, and you're securing it using cryptography. So it's immutable. So really, what it does is that once you put the data on a blockchain, you can't edit it, you can't change it. So it really is it sort of builds trust amongst the community, and it's your testimony to the truth as such. So it's a very powerful tool in that sense to democratize data and as well as power the Internet of Value. So we're moving away from this. We're moving towards an opportunity to reward people for sharing their data. There's a professor I met from Stanford University, who was codifying language and using that in meetings to enable people that come up with ideas during business meetings that lead to some sort of innovation within the company to be rewarded for it. And therefore changing the landscape of how meetings occur. It's not a situation where you're sitting in a meeting holding back a good idea because you know your boss is going to steal it. You're going to get it out there. And everyone's going to try and get these ideas out there as fast as they can and get it put on a blockchain. And then if it leads to an innovation that creates value for the company, you share it. It's fascinating technology, actually.
Yeah, so it's like a real way that you can accelerate innovation through it then, through that, I guess, through that purpose. One thing that you mentioned.
The other exciting thing for us is security token offerings. I don't know if people know about those, but the ability to digitize shares, if you like, so that when people do share data and receive a token like a Fishcoin token, we can give them an equity token as well. And they have ownership. So it's not just like, it's like a frequent flyer point, or in this situation, a frequent data sharing point, if you like, but it actually represents equity in the business. So they can, once the company makes profits, they can receive dividend tokens and convert them into value. That's very exciting as well, because that means that digitizing assets and tokenizing assets like buildings and those sorts of things, or the Mona Lisa, means that we can all have a small fraction of ownership in a painter, in a building. We don't have to be accredited investors. Anyway, I'm sort of digressing. I'm getting into this area, this space that I absolutely love, and I think it's going to really change the world for the better, because we can all be investors in. We don't have to be accredited. We don't have to have hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank. And the government can look at all the secondary transactions, and the post-issuance governance issues are alleviated somewhat. So it's really exciting.
I think it really is. I mean, it's very. It's not tangential. I do see this as pretty central to collaborations and how business ecosystems work as well.
Yep.
So, like a couple of things that you mentioned before. You mentioned trust, accountability, and ownership. So, for ecosystems to really work effectively, there needs to be the trust. You know, that you're kind of working in a really open, transparent way. And again, trust is something that, you can't just have. Like, it has to be earned. It's something that is a value that's exchanged between two different organizations, or two different people, or multiple organizations. And I'm really intrigued to think about how trust is evolving as a bit of a capital or a value post-COVID, because people need trust in their organizations, they need trust in the healthcare system, they need trust in the government. And it's interesting to see how technologies such as blockchain, which are almost kind of built on a foundation of trust and accountability and ownership, can really be utilized to strengthen collaboration moving forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Is there a specific question though?
No, so I think I was just kind of mulling over the this concept of trust, and okay, but a separate question, kind of moving on from that. A separate question I did have for you is, you mentioned that you're part of a few different kind of initiatives. I'm interested to see on the ecosystem side, like this idea of like pop-up ecosystems, or whether you're part of a short pilot or an initiative to test a new idea. Is that something that you're starting to see come up more and more, this sort of short time-boxed collaborations to really test new ideas? Is that something you're seeing in your space?
Yeah, definitely. I think multinational corporations are pretty bad at innovation, whereas that's the game for startups, is to innovate. But where startups have problems is getting scale. So it's very complementary. It allows a multinational to engage a startup to fail fast, learn quickly, and then either adopt it, form a partnership, form a joint venture, or even acquire the startup. So, and you see that happening within companies, sort of entrepreneurs sort of generating that internally within an organization, but also looking outside to startups and the startup ecosystem. And obviously, for startups, it's fantastic to be able to pilot your ideas and test your ideas with multinationals and then scale up.
Yeah, and on that actually, so well, before I ask you this question, for anyone that has kind of questions, please put them in the chat function, and I'll pull a few out. But kind of going back to this idea of startup ecosystems, how can kind of business ecosystems create a competitive advantage for whether kind of SMEs or startups? So how do you think kind of coming together for startups, how does that create some level of advantage?
Well, firstly, it's the sharing of ideas of what you've done, what's worked, what's failed. Coming together in a startup ecosystem, it's almost like a self-help group. And experiences that they may have had that are positive or negative with a particular multinational. Manage your expectations. When you're engaging with multinationals, they do take time. It takes a long time to become a vendor and to go through the processes and those sorts of things. So certainly as a startup, that ecosystem of other startups is fantastic to share those experiences. You can also collaborate with other startups on pilots. You can share staff. You can learn who's the best accounting person for a startup, say accountant in the ecosystem. Obviously with the corporates now coming together, like you mentioned before about Unilever and Nestle all coming together with a common goal. You get an opportunity to work with more corporates than just the one corporate that might be setting up a startup ecosystem, such as Level 3, which has done that together with Unilever's Foundry and set up an ecosystem within the regional headquarters of Unilever. And to bring together startups and corporates, not just Unilever, but Microsoft, Syngenta, and Mitsubishi. So you get to meet them there. And that's driving new partnerships with them and new partnerships with the startups, both together. And so sort of a corporate, startup across the way. So did that answer the question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that did. And actually, I was just looking through a couple of the questions that we had on the Q&A. So there's a question here just on kind of the partnerships. Is there any advice that you can give? So to start the discussion with potential partners or to engage on a potential collaboration, particularly with companies that may be hesitant to break down those boundaries. So any sort of reflections and lessons learned that you have in terms of starting an early conversation about collaboration or partnership
with a multinational.
Yeah, with a multinational. I think this is particularly with companies.
I was trying to read some of the questions and I hit my screen. Any advice? Yeah, like I said before, they're rather large bureaucratic organisations, and so it does take time. Really clearly defined scope when you're engaging. Make sure you read the fine print in terms of, are they engaging you to come up with a solution that they want, and only then. Will they allow you to collaborate with what they consider competitors? So really, you need to be very careful about how you're engaging and what you're offering them. You have to be very clear about your own capabilities as well. The last thing you want is a failure. And just, I don't want to use specific examples. Probably inappropriate. But just be very clear on how you engage and understand that it does take a lot longer to get feedback, to get access sometimes to staff because they're extremely busy. To get out into the field, if you're working in the field, it can be difficult to get access to do that. So as a startup, when it's all under your control, you're working very fast, but it's just a different pace. So be wary of that.
How did you kind of start these initial conversations? As a startup trying to kind of build those relationships with big corporates, is it very much the conversation started based on a personal relationship that you'd built up with someone from that corporate? Was it through a different channel? What was your platform to even start the conversation?
Yeah, Level 3 is a great platform here in Singapore.
Yeah.
To basically sit there and start to meet with people from Unilever, get an understanding of what challenges that they have. And indeed, they would literally introduce challenges to startups and say, look, we want a solution for this. We want someone to work on this or that. So, yeah, it's a great platform to go along to events at these startup communities, such as Level 3. I actually have a role now with DSM as a senior advisor for innovation ecosystems. And as part of that, we managed to bring Level 3 along to help form the Bright Science and Technology Innovation Hub at DSM's headquarters. So being part of this sort of startup ecosystem, I'm now working to grow the startup ecosystem in Singapore, and that's really rewarding.
That's really great. And one thing I typically kind of work with corporates, and what I'm seeing as a big trend now, and has been for a long period of time, is large corporates are looking at startups, venture capital, kind of arms that they may have in replacement for some of their R&D functions. And so you're having some really interesting channels, such as the US ASEAN Business Council, for instance, similar ones with Europe, with Australia, that are really also being used to channel some of these concerns, because many MNCs have similar requirements or have similar sort of ambitions, or whether it's technology needs or data needs, and they're keen to kind of explore what solutions are being developed in the startup ecosystem space that they can consider collaborating with. And sometimes it's just getting the right platform and exposure to have those early conversations. Yeah,
no, absolutely.
Another question I did want to ask that also came through on the chat is, so going back to this idea of trust and accountability. So what would be best practices in terms of ecosystem building to minimize risk exposure and to ensure sustainable trust in a system?
Yeah, well, I think I'm just reading through that question now. Compromised data privacy. Yeah. That's a real challenge nowadays. You have to be right on top of data protection. We also have to consider data sovereignty.
Yeah.
When you're working in industries, the data could be sensitive or considered sensitive by the government. So you have to be very aware of those issues. You have to have a data information policy, security policy, sorry. Make sure you've got one of those. Indeed, when you're working with multinationals, it's often a requirement that you have an information security policy on how you handle data, sensitive data, how do you classify data, how do you handle it, and then how you protect people's personal data, those sorts of things. So, yeah, you need to be aware of those. You can't not be aware of those and engage with multinationals right now. GDPR, for example, in Europe is a good starting point to understand, especially when it comes down to people's personal data.
Yeah, and that, I imagine, GDPR has kind of been adopted almost as the baseline that many other countries are kind of referring to, and obviously with its international scope. But do you find, from a data and transparency standpoint, kind of perhaps a lack of regulatory harmonization is a bit of a challenge for kind of cross-border or cross-party sort of collaborations? Yeah,
definitely. I would choose the more strict of the two or three that you come across and operate off those. So where there's ambiguity, just if it's not going to be too much of a hindrance, really be precautionary on this one, err on the side of caution.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask one final question. Is what advice would you give to startups today? Obviously, with the current situation, with the current instability, travel restrictions, everything else that is going on. So how can startups really actively engage the ecosystem around them, whether in Singapore or across the wider region? What advice would you give?
Actually, there's a fantastic database that's been set up by Lisa Suldre from who also is part of Level 3. I believe she set this up. She certainly shared it with me. It's called the COVID-19 Ecosystem Support. It's a Google Sheet, and it has a number of different startups listed in there and what they do. And so, as much as anything now, we need to be basically talking with one another on a regular basis, sharing experiences and looking for opportunities to engage with one another, but also with multinationals. So that's again where groups like Level 3 are going to be extremely useful and important to, at this stage, remotely connect with multinationals and line up work for yourselves or pilot trials going forward. Obviously, at the moment, DSM is doing quite well in the fact that it's an animal, human nutrition and health company. Even in its material science section, we need new biomedical equipment, those sorts of things. So if you're in the health side, you're in nutrition, you're in materials, especially medical materials, reach out to me. If you want to engage with DSM, you can. Are my contact details made available through this, Sarah, or not?
Yes, I think we're going to circulate the slides and a recording, so perhaps in that we can have our contact details as well, so people can get in touch with you directly.
Yep, me and the team at Padang & Co. That are running which also run Level 3, but also will be managing the Bright Science and Technology Innovation Hub at DSM. So, yeah, if you're in that space and you want to engage with DSM, by all means reach out to either of us, and we can hopefully connect you up with the relevant people within DSM and see if there's interest in collaborating. And if there's interest, if you'd like to come and join us at the hub, then also reach out there and engage with DSM once and meet people personally that work with DSM, and obviously look at opportunities to collaborate.
I know. I feel like I'm hopeful that this the in-person component is going to be starting up at least here in Singapore soon, and hopefully kind of around the region pretty soon as well. So that's a
you
great,
might be able to hear my
out.
kids running around in the background. That's a bit like a BBC moment. I'm waiting for them to bust in the door, even though I told them not to. They're just almost like a balance of energy at the moment. So,
have you got like a little sign on the door?
I should get a little pit bull terrier or some sort of aggressive dog that can barks. No, they're
that's really great.
So I look forward to getting back to the face-to-face, and as it's been good working from home as well. But I look forward to meeting people.
Yeah, likewise, and I think that's also the real benefit of doing some of these webinars, is just trying to kind of promote a bit of kind of engagement, within the community. And again, once the circuit breaker in Singapore's over, we are looking at kind of obviously hosting more events in collaboration with Level 3 and to kind of supporting the development of a really active and engaged kind of startup ecosystem in this space. I think there's loads of really fantastic work going on. It's going to be good to get that conversation going. So we have just a flag. I've got on the screen now a number of upcoming events at Level 3, so you can see that they have a packed schedule with loads and loads coming up. So do check out their website and take a look at what's coming down the pipeline. And again, I hope to kind of see everyone in person in the future at one of these Level 3 events. It's been really great being able to kind of do this and reach out to so many people. And Alistair, thank you so much for joining today. It's been really good to have.
Thank you very much. I hope I made sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, so thanks again, everyone. And just as a recap, we will be circulating all the slides from today, as well as the webinar recordings, and then contact details for myself, Alistair, Level 3, if you want to get in touch. So until then, stay safe and stay healthy, and hopefully we'll speak again in person at some point.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.